Breaking news, broadcast from the future. Dear people of Earth in 2018, we're coming to you live from the year 2035. This is an emergency broadcast that requires your absolute undivided attention.
Okay. Are you sure they'll get this? Okay. Dear people of Earth, in 2018, we're coming to you live from the year 2035. Now, it doesn't matter who I am. What matters is what I have to say. Now, this is an emergent... flies. What matters is what I have to tell you. Now, this is an emergency broadcast that requires your absolute undivided attention. So please just put that foot down and the ginger beer and especially the phone. Put the cell phone down. Now, you need to listen. Listen as if your lives depend on it. And in this case, in fact, they do. Now, the world here in 2035 is in a massive global crisis. And we must warn you that the roots of this crisis started with you in 2018.
We want to tell you how we got to be in this state, where land, water, food, and energy constraints drove the world into a constant state of conflict, oppression, and exploitation. Here in 2035, we call this Drought Robot. The Drought Robot world began to develop in 2018 when Earth's biggest superpower, the United States of America, through the rise of populism, reversed the gains that had been made by mankind through the advent of scientific and technological advancement. America's leaders refused to believe that climate change was real, and their disbelief set off a string of short-termist energy planning that set off spiraling climate catastrophes. Globally, there was no consensus on how to tackle issues like food security and access to safe water for all citizens, whether from rich or poor countries, on account of growing population. The growing inequality gap in some of the world's biggest economies like China, India, and the US created massive social contestations over access to basic goods such as water and food. Chaos became normal, and police and military forces cracked down on citizens. As food scarcity increased, corporations turned to increasingly untested forms of growing low-quality food to feed the masses, while the rich feasted in elite gatherings and spaces that the majority were locked out of. People became sicker and food systems more vulnerable to new and rapidly evolving bacteria and diseases. Enhanced developments in robotics resulted in less human jobs and less human contact. Advances in green energies like biofuels fueled the rise in prices of food globally. At the same time, America retreated as the global policeman, and the new rogue states that threatened to destabilize the world started to rise. We should have realized our trajectory when the first mini-nuclear weapons were used. But our leaders failed to take any action. The world moved rapidly from a bipolar system to an asymmetric multipolar system, with no single superpower capable of acting and exerting significant influence at a global level. Meanwhile, Africa and South American countries made a huge mistake by relying on Chinese debt for infrastructure financing. The Chinese had structured these deals in such a way that they only employed their own citizens at the expense of locals in African countries. By 2025, urbanization became rampant, and over 70% of the global population living in massive cities, exacerbating air pollution, transport congestion, and waste management. Local human cultures started to face extinction, or evolved ways and lost their unique competitive advantage. While the whole world is suffering here today in Drought Robot, Africa's young people are particularly hard hit by a lack of job creation and the rise of unemployment. They are Generation Jobless here in our modern-day 2035. The scramble for Africa's natural resources like oil and minerals became the heart of a global scramble for resources. Global powers began to reshape aid around narrow interests, usually paying large bribes to key decision makers, seeking to privatize Africa's resource bounty and place it in the hands of multinational corporations and protect it through private armies. The race for arable land to grow biofuel crops was underway years before even 2018, where you currently are now, as reports showed that 11 British companies owned close to 1.5 million hectares of land for biofuel production in Africa by 2011. Between 2018 and 2030, Africa's youth population doubled, but there were no jobs. With 200 million Africans between the ages of 14 and 24 in 2019, the continent stared in the face of a huge problem of youth unemployment. Coupled with this, Generation Jobless had to contend with low levels of investment in health by most African countries, which resulted in weak health systems that lacked the capacity to respond to emergencies. Young men joined ethnic or geography-based gangs and militia, their only opportunity, fueling conflicts and instability. Over time, the corporate scramble for resources on the continent led to military action, and a wave of new cross-border and internal conflicts emerged. Africa became a dumping ground of nuclear and electronic waste. Artificial intelligence replaced much manual labor, leaving work only for the educated and technologically savvy elite. Most Africans could see the technological future, but simply could not access it, driving up their social frustration. The impact of Generation Jobless on human development was deep and profound. Every childhood development became a luxury for the few. Due to rapid urbanization, most families relied on fast foods and survived on high-calorie, low nutritional value foods. Women had poor maternal nutrition, leading to low birth weight and key micronutrient deficiencies, leading to a higher burden of disease in childhood. Most African countries failed to invest in health and education systems, leading to massive institutional failures in maternal and childhood health care. Families experienced financial strain, reducing their ability to provide responsive care, and children faced constant threats to their safety as they were most vulnerable to air pollution and exposure to chemicals, a growing reality in their new urban environments. This led to poor cognitive development over multiple generations, fundamentally holding back the continent's human capital. Today, in 2035, the life expectancy of people on the African continent is 45 years of age.
Young people with no prospects of employment have turned to substances to cope with their daily lives. Alcohol, drugs, often of poor quality, cut with harsh chemicals, lead to increasing levels of violence by young men, accidental deaths on the road, and a significant increase in femicide. Now, access to meager resources, opportunities, and life chances were policed by elite groups, often the politically and militarily connected. Access to quality education has become limited. Private corporations lost trust in the public education systems and so imported their own skills, robotic and AI solutions.
It became aspirational to become a digital micro-jobber, filling the gaps between what AI systems could do and emerging needs.
That's what is reigning now. Fertility rates have started to skyrocket around 2025, reversing decades of gains in reducing population growth. Now, this puts significantly more pressure on all, and I mean all, public systems.
Some governments, desperate to solve the joblessness crisis, started mass recruitment drives into the militaries, trying to contain young people with meager salaries. Inequality skyrocketed as more and more benefits of human development accrued only to the wealthy and were missing for the majority. Incomes fell dramatically in real terms. Due to state of collapse and thus privatization, all basic services such as education and healthcare became expensive. In this context, culture became static and divisive.
In a harsh, relentless struggle for survival, creating expression was either overtly oppressed or strangled out of existence through poverty and disillusionment. Art as protest was quickly crushed, and human individual identity became broken down.
And so, what we are left with today in 2035 is that our oceans have become toilets. Mother Nature and her kids have been invaded and are on the verge of total system collapse, and our human capital has been irrevocably stunted. We're facing a looming threat of extinction as a species, and our faith is in your hands. Before you sink into deep despair, the main reason why we interrupted your current news broadcast here in 2018 is to help you to see that there is another path that can be taken. One that brings an outcome of possibilities. Do not be tempted to zone off now. Listen carefully as we will share the story of how we could be a sunshine robot world that has thriving people who live in dignity and can reach their full potential. Between 2018 and 2020, a large-scale global mindset shift takes place in putting climate change mitigation and adaptation at the heart of every major global issue. People mobilize around the world to clean up the environment, switch from dirty to clean, renewable energy, and a commitment to new technologies. Water, food, land, and energy are not constraints in the sunshine robot world. They are an opportunity. Global long-term cooperation by governments and the scientific communities around climate change creates a wave of new innovations. New technologies are governed sensibly, leading to the approval of powerful new technologies for increasing crop yields and improving the nutritional value of foods. Water resources are managed as a global public good, and over time, fewer and fewer parts of the world become drought areas. While the effects of climate change still take place, a new set of global regulations rapidly drive the globe towards new forms of energy production, new building and agricultural processes, and a stronger commitment to global well-being. There is still rapid urbanization, but cities plan well, and new technologies help to solve waste management, density, and hygiene concerns. This urbanization is heralded not by masses of informal settlements, but by high-density architecture with a commitment to green spaces. Public transport systems become the pride of all major cities, and new investments are prioritized to ensure the smooth daily movement of people across new megacities. By 2025, internet access is universal and cheap. All people now have access to information and the power to make their voices heard. This drives a new wave of democratization, power to people, and a wave of governments from 2025 commits to reducing inequality and improving wages, social safety nets, and people's well-being. In this sunshine robot world, Africa becomes a powerful, positive, and effective role player as it unleashes its generation unbound, where job creation becomes a focal point with positive outcomes. As you move towards 2025 and beyond, you can create an economic boom in Africa, made possible by good policies and efficient implementation by African governments in cooperation with private partners and regional bodies. In this context, trade restrictions and distortions are corrected by ensuring the proper functioning of food commodity markets, investments in the agricultural production technologies, and strong governance. Due to smart land redistribution and capitalization strategies, African agricultural productivity and product quality will increase rapidly. Agricultural workers are treated fairly in this scenario, and new African-owned global companies invest in innovations that have drastically increased on-farm and off-farm productivity, leading to increased household incomes for rural communities. In Generation Unbound, African economies are now so robust that they are resilient to financial speculation and are verging on being entirely independent of foreign debt. Through collaborative efforts by African governments, the AU Science Commission for Africa is able to fund a continent-wide 10-year project from 2020 to 2030 that eventually yields a vaccine for malaria. the hitherto leading cause of death for many Africans. African political leaders' new thinking and new policies leads to improvement of economic conditions, creating more than 500 million new jobs in under a decade. Deliberate decisions by African governments to balance between biofuel crops attributes to the abundance of food security and sustainable natural resources. Laws and regulations around green taxes and fossil fuels encouraging environmental protection are now the norm. Reduced water pollution and desalination have seen the increase in fresh water supply. Recycling has become ingrained in people's way of life. Where conflict used to rule the continent, with a generation of fully employed young men and successful conflict resolution measures, a new peaceful era descends on the continent. Physical borders are no longer a deterrent to movement, and transboundary cultural alliances are now the norm, leading to free movement and acceptance of foreign labor. This generation is unbound, tech-savvy, highly mobile, and part of a renaissance of the continent that drives its place in the global family. Indeed, it is the human development of Africa's people that is most profoundly impacted in a positive way by a generation-unbound continent. As diverse, healthy, fresh foods increasingly become abundant and cheap to access, maternal and child nutrition levels reach optimal levels. Stronger, more effective governments create effective primary healthcare systems, which ensures quality antenatal support for all women and excellent pediatric care. An employed and stable adult generation are able to provide responsive and engaged care for their children, who are safe and secure in formal homes. Early learning is a continental priority, and universal access to play-based learning is achieved by 2035. The life expectancy of the continent grows to 80 years on average. This is largely due to improved access to healthier foods and the reduction of non-communicable diseases such as obesity, diabetes, and hypertension being reduced. Increasing economic and social inclusion and well-being in society leads to improvement in overall mental health. The wave of competent and effective governments that come into place from 2020 prioritize education. And by 2030, all children access quality basic education. New fields of skills development, crucial to harnessing the potential of the fourth industrial revolution, are prioritized alongside investment into human well-being through arts education. African-led scientific breakthroughs become commonplace. Through improved governance, the windfall of a growing economy accrues largely to the poorest 40% of the population rather than the wealthy. Over time, this dramatically reduces income inequality. Social welfare programs and schemes are in place for the most vulnerable. Urbanization is well managed, with strong public investments into formal housing and public transport. Savings and investments grow. A renaissance of the arts starts to take place, and traditional qualities of culture mingle with cosmopolitanism, resulting from Africa investing into its best talent and attracting that from abroad. Egalitarianism and multiculturalism flourishes. Societies become less dogmatic and hierarchical, allowing for free flow of ideas, innovations, perspective, and expressions. Africans, through cinema, photography, fashion, and other outlets, own and define our culture. Global perspectives on the continent shift, and Africa becomes a defining force in global culture on its own terms. This sunshine robot, generation unbound world, is not impossible. Indeed, if you choose the drought robot, generation jobless pathway, then we face looming disaster that will make a thriving, prosperous humanity impossible to achieve. Instead, to dream and to hope for a sunshine robot, generation unbound society will only seem like a myth from the everlasting stories of victories of the Ashanti or Nubian societies of yesteryear. But if myths are to be believed, then sometimes all it takes is a prophecy and a collective commitment to achieve the unimaginable. The choice of the sunshine robot, generation unbound scenario, is our challenge to you from the future. And we know There are enough courageous, talented young leaders to make it happen. Their path will not be easy, but it is a task that must be done. For them to change the trajectory of Earth and the human development of the people of Africa, to avoid the drought and step into the sun, to transform a generation from being jobless to being unbound, these courageous leaders must take a stand. Through a collective strategic agenda, young leaders from across African governments, academia, private sector, sciences, civil society, media and culture can change the trajectory of their people. There are at least 6 things that must be done by them to set a new course for the African continent. 1. Drive forward-thinking strategies that unlock the potential of the continent's people by promoting free movement of labor, free trade, open and tokenized capital markets. 2. Driving a strong, clear and ethical regional agenda that positions and reinforces Africa's role as a global power. 3. As part of reimagining and reigniting the continent, these young leaders must rebrand Africa away from a needy and impoverished continent to a rightful global power with the right cultural and commercial savvy. 4. Promote the implementation of social safety net, health investment, and universal basic income to guarantee high standard of living. 5. Harness the power of the global African diaspora through innovative investment, dual citizenship, and new technology strategies that lead to a wave of reinvestment and connection to the continent from across the globe. 6. Develop a platform for world-class human capital through investment in education aimed at achieving 100% literacy by grade 4 with emphasis on science, technology, and engineering, making Africa the center of convergence of the world's best and brightest.
The time is now to be the change you have been looking for. You are our only hope. You must act now as all our lives depend on it. Act with courage, act with determination, and do not be deterred when it gets hard, because it will. Act with passion and dreams that you have to create a better tomorrow and help realize the vision of true freedom and humanity that your forefathers fought so valiantly for. The African continent's people are ready and waiting for a future that is unbound, a future of prosperity, hope, dignity, one in which all the people thrive and live their fullest potential. That future is possible, but it depends on you.